Name svaha parayanti. Brahmar anashanadami. Pibato chudyaburu piyusham. Tadvagad vivinishitam. Prabhus. Name svaha parayanti. Anashanadami. Tadvagya nishadam. Name svaha parayanti. Bhavanana shanadami. Bibato chutapiyusham. Tadvagayad vivinishitam. Name svaha parayanti. Bhavanana shanadami. Bibato chutapiyusham. Tadvagyad vivinishitam. Na, never, mere, mine, asavaha, life, parayanti, becomes exhausted. Brahman, O learned Brahmana, Anashanad, Ami, because of fasting. Pibataha, because of my drinking. Achyuta, of the infallible. Piyusham, nectar. Tat, your. Vakya adbi, ocean of speech. Vinishritam, flowing down from. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. O learned Brahmana, because of my drinking the nectar of the message of the infallible personality of Godhead, which is flowing down from the ocean of your speeches, I do not feel any sort of exhaustion due to my fasting. Purport. The cyclic succession from Brahma, Narada, Vyasa, and Shukadeva Goswami is particularly different from others. The disciplic succession from other sages are simply a waste of time, being devoid of Achyuta Katha, or the infallible message, or the message of the infallible Lord. The mental speculators can present their theories very nicely by reason and arguments, but such reasons and arguments are not infallible, for they are defeated by better mental speculators. Maharaja Parikshit was not interested in the dry speculation of the flickering mind, but he was interested in the topics of the Lord, because factually he felt that by hearing such a nectarian message from the mouth of Shukadeva Goswami, he was not feeling any exhaustion, even though he was fasting because of his imminent death. One can indulge in hearing the mental speculators, but such hearing cannot endure for any length of time. One will be exhausted very soon from hearing such hay-nade ways of thinking, and no one in the world can be satisfied simply by hearing such useless speculations. The message of the Lord, especially from a personality like Shukadeva Goswami, can never be tiring, even though one may be exhausted from other causes. In some editions of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the text of the last line of this verse reads, Anyata kubitad dvijat, which means that the king might be overwhelmed by the thought of his imminent death by a snake bite. The snake is also twice born, and its anger is compared to the cursing Brahmana boy, who was without good intelligence. Maharaja Parikshit was not at all afraid of death, for he was fully encouraged by the message of the Lord. One who is fully absorbed in Achyuta Katha can never be afraid of anything in this world. Om Jnana Timidandasya Jnana Jana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishnam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayambhupakadamayam Dadati Svapadhantikam Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yutapalakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvetam Savadutam Bharjana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpatet Gopesha Gopika Kanta Yana Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Goyangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatarubhyasya Kripa Sindhu Bhavevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadaya Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Welcome to this morning's Bhagavatam class. This morning we're reading a verse recited by Parikshit Maharaj to Shukadeva Goswami. This lesson itself is very, very important for all of us because in this particular verse we can learn two particular things. The first thing that we can learn, which we will discuss within the first half of today's class, is the importance and the benefit of hearing Krishna Katha. And the second thing that we will learn from this verse is how to actually hear Krishna Katha. We will learn about the practical application of Krishna Katha. This verse itself is probably the best example. Actually, the whole pastime of Parikshit Maharaj listening to Srimad Bhagavatam is probably the best example of hearing of Krishna Katha. And it's very important that we learn how to practically apply what we actually have with us. Knowledge doesn't have any value necessarily if it is not practically applied. So the second half of today's class will focus on how we can actually practically apply the lessons that we learn. Okay, so this verse is a statement that actually testifies the quality of a pure devotee. Parikshit Maharaj is saying in the translation to this verse that even after fasting and on the verge of death, he is not exhausted from hearing Krishna Katha. Now, Parikshit Maharaj, we know that the pastime goes that he went hunting and he got cursed. Long story short, he got cursed to die within 7 days. And he took the opportunity to hear Krishna Katha. But one thing that is very extraordinary in this case is that Parikshit Maharaj is not exhausted by hearing Krishna Katha from Shukadeva Goswami. Normally we can see in the modern day material world, we tend to take so many breaks to do one particular task. But here Shukadeva Goswami is sitting for 7 days non-stop, 24 hours non-stop, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Now, His Grace Lalgvin Prabhu, he has said that Shukadeva Goswami asked Parikshit Maharaj if he wanted a break because just a few days back from the time when Srimad Bhagavatam was recited, just a few days back, Parikshit Maharaj, as we know, he was hunting in the forest. And from one day of hunting, he actually got really, really exhausted, really tired. And as we know, he became thirsty, really thirsty. And somehow or other, by the influence of time, influence of Krishna's arrangement, he ended up putting a snake on a rishi's neck. But we can understand that a few days ago, Parikshit Maharaj, he was very exhausted from one day of hunting. But here he's sitting for 7 days hearing Krishna Katha. This is the power of actually listening to Krishna Katha, because the Prabhupada was mentioning that one person doesn't become necessarily exhausted by hearing Krishna Katha, because unlike other mundane activities, we become exhausted. But in this case, Parikshit Maharaj is not becoming exhausted from hearing Krishna Katha. Parikshit Maharaj actually says that he is not tired or even exhausted because he's drinking the nectar of the message of the infallible personality of Godhead. So what is very interesting is that he actually characterizes hearing Srimad Bhagavatam as drinking the nectar. And His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, in a class on this lecture, he said that this is a statement that only a pure devotee can make. Because this is quite a statement. Only a pure devotee can speak like this. I mean, he is comparing the Srimad Bhagavatam, hearing Krishna Katha, as the flowing of a nectarian river. And because of that, he's not tired or exhausted. So here, the Srimad Bhagavatam is described as nectar. So nectar, as we all know, is a sugary fluid, sweet juice. But it is also known as a delicacy, a sweet delicacy, that can combat any other foul, sour taste. Normally we drink nectar when nectar is normally drunk to combat some other sour and foul taste. So our material life, similarly, there are so many things that we can actually find that is foul and sour. There's no real taste of happiness. Like we look all around us in the material world that we are in, there's no true picture of happiness. However, these pure tastes of material existence, they are able to be combated simply by hearing Krishna Katha. Lord Brahma actually gave a verse, Srimad Bhagavatam 2.6.46. Lord Brahma says to Narada Muni, I think we just read this verse maybe a few months back, but Lord Brahma said that hearing of the activities counteracts all foul matches accumulated in the ear. These pastimes are pleasing to hear and are to be relished. So by hearing Krishna Katha, all of the foul matters that we accumulate in our ears, they become extinguished, they become cut down by the hearing of Krishna Katha. In the purport of this verse, Srila Prabhupada does speak very boldly. He says that every living entity has a tendency to hear pleasing messages, and as such, almost every one of us is inclined to hear news and talks broadcast by the radio stations. But the difficulty is that no one is satisfied at heart by hearing all those messages. So here Srila Prabhupada is saying that it is our tendency to actually hear pleasing messages. That is just our nature. All we want to do is hear. But the only thing is that we're not hearing the right thing. And because we're not hearing the right thing, we're not actually getting proper happiness. Everyone wants to be happy. And normally our happiness can also be received through hearing as well. But the only issue is that we are hearing something impure, and as a result we can't get happy. Hearing, it's such a natural thing in society, but unfortunately, if what we are hearing is impure, then how can we get a pure emotion? Happiness itself is a pure emotion, but if we hear something impure, how can we become happy? So people in Srimad Bhagavatam 2.6.46, the same purport, Srila Prabhupada says that people who take interest in hearing Srimad Bhagavatam clear their hearts of accumulated mundane filth. There are 1,001 rash literatures on the market, but one who has taken interest in the Srimad Bhagavatam loses all interest in such filthy things. So one thing that we can immediately take away from this verse is that Srila Prabhupada describes hearing anything else apart from Krishna Katha as accumulated mundane filth. Now, we may not see this as mundane filth, we engage in it every day, but anything that's apart from Krishna Katha, it is to be considered as mundane filth. And the very important thing that we have to take from this verse is that Krishna Katha is like nectar. In Srimad Bhagavatam 10.31.9, in the Gopi Gita, we know that the gopis, in their prayers, they say, Tava Katamritam Tapta Jivanam. Tava means yours, and Kata Amritam means the nectar of words. So the gopis are saying that Krishna, your nectar of words are Tapta Jivanam. Tapta Jivanam means life for those aggravated in the material world. So the gopis themselves say that the descriptions of Krishna's pastimes, they are like nectar to the aggravated material lives. Krishna Katha is known to pure us in our material conditioned state. So that is the first main point that we can take from this verse. The second point we can actually take from this verse is that Parikshit Maharaj is hearing Krishna Katha from a bona fide source. To hear from an authorized source is very, very important, even in this material world. In the material world, we can see that there are so many false news that we actually hear. It's very hard to find something that is bona fide. But it is very important for us to take advantage of a bona fide parampara. Otherwise, the hearing that we are actually listening to, the source that we are listening to actually becomes useless. An example of this is the Bhagavad Gita. Now, I was listening to a few classes, and in the Bhagavad Gita, if we look when Srila Prabhupada published Bhagavad Gita, he published Bhagavad Gita in the mid-1900s. But if we look 200 years before that, before Srila Prabhupada published Bhagavad Gita, there were 200 Bhagavad Gitas that were published, 200 different versions of Bhagavad Gita. But out of all those 200 versions of Bhagavad Gita, not one person became a devotee. The reason is because those 200 versions of Bhagavad Gita were not bona fide, they were not pure, they were not authority. However, when Srila Prabhupada actually published his Bhagavad Gita, just one Bhagavad Gita, he published it as it is, from the Supreme Lord as it is. And we can see there are so many devotees that actually have come as a result. So we can see that what cannot be achieved by so many years of mental speculation can be achieved just by listening to the Supreme Lord and keeping his message as it is. The knowledge... there's one example actually given by Srila Prabhupada quite commonly, that knowledge that is given, false interpretations, mental speculation, is like a milk, like a pot of milk, and if a snake goes and puts one drop of poison in that milk, the whole milk becomes poison. You can't say, okay, this milk is 99.99% pure milk, 0.001% poison. There's no such thing. Milk, when there's a drop of poison, the whole thing becomes poisonous. So in the same way, we have to make sure that what we hear, there's not one touch of mental speculation. We can't have mental speculation when we listen to Krishna Katha. Otherwise, that whole thing becomes poisonous. Now, one very important point that is actually mentioned in this verse is Krishna Katha is Achyuta Katha. Now, Achyuta, as we all know, is infallible, and Katha means pastimes. So, Srila Prabhupada has defined Achyuta Katha as the message of the infallible Lord. Now, Srila Prabhupada in the purport says that the disciplic succession from other sages are simply a waste of time, being devoid of Achyuta Katha, or the message of the infallible Lord. So we can see that this Achyuta Katha, this message of the infallible Lord, it actually makes us different from all other paramparas that there are. Like we can see there are so many different paramparas. You go to India, the number of paramparas there are is astonishing. But the thing that we have to remember is that anything that is not linked properly to Krishna, anything that is not linked to the authority, it can't be taken as, it can't have the same effect. It can't be taken as truth. It doesn't have any value. And if we look, to testify this, we don't have to look any further than Srimad Bhagavatam. We can look at the Chatusloki, one of the Chatuslokas that is in the Srimad Bhagavatam, one of the main 4 verses, Srimad Bhagavatam 2.9.34. I'm sure all of you may know this verse. Rita ertam yat pratiyata, na pratiyata jatmani, tadvidya atmanomaya yata basho yata tamaha. So in this verse, Krishna is actually telling Lord Brahma that, O Brahma, whatever appears to be of any value, if it is without relation to me, it has no reality. Know it as my illusory energy, that reflection which appears to be in darkness. So if something is not connected to Krishna, Krishna says that that thing is not of any value. This I'm not saying, no one else is saying. Krishna is saying that whatever is not linked to Krishna, it has no value. So if anything is not connected to Krishna, we can understand that that thing has no value. And we can see that other paramparas, they are not connected to authority. Srila Prabhupada says that because other paramparas, they are not connected to authority, because of that, they can present many reasons and many good arguments that are crafted very eloquently by flattery language and rich literary techniques. But such reasons and arguments, they're not infallible because they are simply defeated by other mental speculators. And the purport Srila Prabhupada says, the mental speculators can present their theories very nicely by reason and argument. But such reasons and arguments are not infallible because they are defeated by better mental speculators. So mental speculation is not infallible because although it may be presented very, very nicely, it still can be defeated by many other mental speculators. Like we can see some person proposes some theory, and then always, we don't have to look further than our modern days history, you can say. Like in science, for example, there have been so many theories, and people are just speculating on what is truth, and there's this, it keeps building up. That's just mental speculation. People can't justify what they know as truth, they just keep speculating. And because of that, these speculations are not infallible. They're not Achyuta Katha. Achyuta Katha is what actually comes from authority, comes from a bona fide line. So we can see that no one can actually challenge Krishna consciousness because Krishna consciousness actually follows the proper parampara. It follows the authority. We can see that there have been many times when ISKCON itself, it's actually emerged many times out of many, many challenging situations. Like first there were so many legal issues that actually occurred, so many financial issues as well. And ISKCON has actually come out of these, and let alone come out of all these problems, but it's also emerged, it's still increasing. ISKCON has come out of so many problems because of its authoritative state. His Holiness Radha Govinda Goswami Maharaj, he gave a very nice point on the parampara. He said that the parampara is like a lotus flower. Now, for a lotus flower to be fresh, it has to be connected to the ground. Once you actually pluck a lotus flower from the ground, it will start to become dry. It's not fresh anymore. Same thing with the parampara. The parampara has to be connected to the true source, to the authority. Once it is not connected to the authority, then it loses all its freshness. It has no value. And His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, he actually says that every birth we get a father and a mother, but very rarely do we get the opportunity to get association of Guru and Krishna. Now, to get association of a bona fide parampara, it is very, very rare. His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj is saying that every single life we get a father, we get a mother. I mean, that thing, it happens every single life. It's not rare. But what is really, really rare is to actually get the association of a bona fide disciplic succession. This human life itself, as we know, it is very, very rare. After so many species, we get this human form of life. But even more rare than getting a human form of life is actually to be connected by a bona fide parampara. So therefore, by following the example of Parikshit Maharaj, we have to try and take the advantage of this bona fide parampara. Because otherwise, there'll be no difference between us and all the other mental speculators, all the other unbona fide paramparas that there are. We have to actually start taking advantage. We have to take advantage of the Srimad Bhagavatam, take advantage of the disciplic succession that we are in, just like Parikshit Maharaj has actually done. Once we do that, then we can easily start to flourish. Srila Prabhupada, he was in a morning walk, and there, while he was walking, there on one side there was grass that was, very, really fresh. It was rich green grass. On the other side, there was dead, dry grass, yellow dry grass. And Srila Prabhupada asked his disciples, why is this grass green and why is this grass yellow? And the disciples, they had no answer. And then he said that the grass that is here, it is connected to the root. The roots are connected. They get water. That is why these grass, they're fresh. But if we look at the other side, the dry grass, the connection has been broken. The root has been cut off. The connection is lost. Because that connection is lost, they become dry. So we can see that for us to actually take the full advantage of Krishna consciousness, we have to hear from a bona fide source. We have to hear from Parampara. Otherwise, if we don't have our connection, then what we're doing is of no value at all. So the third point that we can take from this verse is that Parikshit Maharaj was fearless when listening to Krishna Katha. Now, Srila Prabhupada translate this verse as saying, I do not feel any sort of exhaustion due to my fasting. Now, this is quite a statement. I mean, a person who was on the verge of his death, just 7 days left, he was going to leave his body. He's fasting, and he's not even drinking any water. He's listening down and listening, but he's not feeling any exhaustion at all. Now, this is quite a statement. But in the purport, Srila Prabhupada actually says that Parikshit Maharaj, he was not at all afraid of death. And the reason he was actually not afraid of death is because he was fully encouraged by the message of Krishna. Now, there was no sign of exhaustion in Parikshit Maharaj. In Parikshit Maharaj was not exhausted. What to speak of fear? He was not even getting exhausted. So the reason behind Parikshit Maharaj becoming fearless is actually given very nicely by His Holiness Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj. He says that Parikshit Maharaj understood that he was the soul and he was not the body. Now, by understanding that one is not the body, one is actually the soul, one becomes very fearless. Now we can see that to understand that one is the soul, not the body, Srila Prabhupada, in the beginning of every single class, in the beginning stage, Srila Prabhupada always says repeatedly that I'm not the body, I'm the soul. And what we need to understand is that this is actually the first process for us to become pure, for us to become fearless as well. Srila Prabhupada, I think it was Easy Journey or Coming Back, one of those two small books, he gave the example of Socrates. Now, Socrates, as we know, was a Greek, or I think he's from Athens. He was some big philosopher. And as we all may know, he got executed. But the thing that Srila Prabhupada was saying is that he was not at all afraid of death. The reason he was not afraid of death is because he understood that he was actually the soul. Now, Socrates, as we know, he was one of those first philosophers who actually went against what the political bodies were saying. And he said that he was the soul. And obviously he got executed for that. But Socrates did not get, was not afraid of death. He actually accepted death. So by understanding that one is actually the soul, one becomes fearless. That's the main point that we should take away from this verse. But the question that we actually have to ask ourselves is, how do we become fearless? In this material world, everyone is fearless somehow or the other. Like, you can be fearless. I mean, there are so many reasons for one person to be fearful. Like right now, I'm in Year 12 right now. And there are so many reasons for people to be fearful. I remember, we had our exams just a few weeks back, preliminary exams. And there was this one student, he was stressing out like anything. He was really, really stressed out. And he was a hard worker. He was studying really, really well. He was dedicated. He was intelligent as well. But he was really, really stressed out. And he reached a stage where you could see that even if a mosquito bit him, he would be like, oh, what if I die of malaria? He'd be like, he was really, really scared. And because of that fear, I don't know what happened. He was probably smarter than me. Like, I'll give my homework to him to check. But he was so fearful. And we found out a few days ago, they actually passed with distinction. But there are so many reasons for us to be fearful. Look in this material world. There's so many reasons for us to be fearful. But the purport, Srila Prabhupada actually says that Srila Prabhupada tells us how to actually not become afraid. And Srila Prabhupada says that one who is fully absorbed in Achyuta Kata can never be afraid of anything in this world. Now, in Krishna consciousness, we can see the sole proof of this. We can see that Srila Prabhupada was alone. He was in America. He had, I think 40 rupees of or 40 Indian rupees with him. He suffered a few heart attacks as well. And when we look, when he was in America, he had no contacts. He knew no one pretty much. Srila Prabhupada describes that he came like a vagabond. Like he came like no one knew him. One very important thing that we actually have to take is that when we look at the photos of Srila Prabhupada, though, we can see that Srila Prabhupada is fearless. There's not one touch of fear in Srila Prabhupada's eyes. Like, he's walking very, very fearlessly. There's no one there, like in a foreign land, but Srila Prabhupada is fearless. We can even see that all the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, even, we look at the devotees that we have, there are so many devotees who are actually very, very fearless. Like, I can give an example of His Holiness Vivekananda Goswami Maharaj, my spiritual master. Right now, he's actually preaching very relentlessly in France. In France, maybe you may or may not know the situation. France, there was one time where it was very, very top in Sanskrit, very, very top in book distribution. But somehow or other, as time went on, things started to slow down for many reasons, political reasons, conflicting reasons as well. So it started to go down. And I've seen from my own experience that when Guru Maharaj, when he went to New Mayapur was is a temple in France. It's a castle pretty much. And when he went there, he's pretty much alone, but he's still fearless. So we can see that the devotees that we actually have with us today, they are fearless. And I remember, I think 3 or 4 years back, I think I was in Year 7, and I had a PE teacher with me. PE, you probably know, sports teacher. And in Year 7, I was there. And somehow or other, by hook or crook, this is a whole another story, like, by itself. But somehow or other, one teacher found that I was a Hare Krishna. I was in the movement. And when she found out, she actually asked me, how are Hare Krishnas not scared? Now, this person is an outsider, and she is asking me, how are Hare Krishnas not scared? And I asked her, what do you mean? And she said, Keshav, I'll be honest with you. I see you on the streets, you're either wearing curtains or you're wearing sheets. I don't know what you're wearing. You go, how are you not scared? And they say you go door to door, you knock on the doors, you give books. He says, don't you feel scared? And I didn't give any answer. I'll be honest, I didn't give any answer. I didn't know what to say. But we can see that what we are doing, it's very, very dangerous. People consider it as very, very dangerous. Going on the street with a drum in your hands, wearing nothing pretty much. It's strange. It's very strange. But one person who actually absorbs himself in Krishna Katha, he can never become fearful. We can see so many examples of the devotees. Like every single day, we hear so many Sankirtan stories of devotees who are really, really fearless. And that's the benefit of hearing Krishna Katha, I guess, because people are fearless even when in everything that they do. What people consider outside as being, really, really dangerous, devotees, we can see they take that with open hands. They're not necessarily fearful. His Grace Gokuleshwara Prabhu, he gave a very nice class a few years back in Juhu, and he very nicely explained that every single entity in this living world is fearful. But at the same time, the wind moves out of fear of Krishna. The ocean does not cross its boundary because it is fearful of Krishna. The sun rises because it is in fear of Krishna. Yamaraja actually performs his duties because he is in fear of Krishna, in fear of Krishna's punishment. Indra performs his duty because he is fearful of Krishna. Even fear personified is fearful of Krishna. So what to speak of us? His Grace Gokuleshwara Prabhu was saying that what to speak of us? If we take shelter of Krishna, then how can fear come to us? Even fear personified is fearful of Krishna. So if we actually, take this opportunity to hear Krishna Katha, then how can we become fearful? If we take shelter of one person who conquers even fear himself, then how can we become fearful? So if we connect to Krishna, that is one way that we can become fearless. So it's nearly time. I'll just quickly summarize everything that we have covered. Krishna Katha, the first point that we mentioned today is that Krishna Katha is the nectar that can combat all the foulness of material existence. So this Krishna Katha that we have with us, it's like a nectar. The second point that we made is that Parikshit Maharaj heard Krishna Katha from a bona fide source. He heard from Parampara. And because he heard from Parampara, he actually heard the truth, and what he heard actually had value. And the third point is that he heard Srimad Bhagavatam with rapt attention, fully absorbed, and because he was actually fully absorbed, he didn't have any sign of fear. So on that note, I'll conclude here. Thank you very much for being here today. For all of you, I'm very, very junior sitting here today. Thank you very much for being here. Please pray for me that somehow or other I can improve in this service. Srimad Bhagavatam Mahaprana ki, Jai Srila Prabhupada ki, Jai Srila Gurudeva ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande.
Radha